30 years before you testified, you write in your recent piece about how, quote, in my lifetime, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, something I remember vividly since I was at the American Embassy in Moscow and translated some of Khrushchev's messages to Kennedy. You continue, quote, the end of the week of messages back and forth, I translated Khrushchev's longest. It was agreed that Khrushchev would remove the nuclear missiles from Cuba. What was not announced was that Kennedy also agreed that he would remove the U.S. missiles from Turkey, but that this commitment must not be made public, unquote. This is President Kennedy's address November 2nd, 1962, announcing the dismantling of Soviet missile bases in Cuba.
My fellow citizens, I want to take this opportunity to report on the conclusions which this government has reached on the basis of yesterday's aerial photographs, which will be made available tomorrow, as well as other indications, namely that the Soviet missile bases in Cuba are being dismantled, their missiles and related equipment are being crated, and the fixed installations at these sites are being destroyed.
So that's President John F. Kennedy in 1962. How relevant that is today. I'm looking at the front page of the New York Times, and one of the headlines is, Ukraine, Putin's bigger fear may lie in Poland, with a sub-headline, new U.S. military base is a mere 100 miles from Russia. That's about how far Cuba is from the coast of Florida, right? About 90 miles. If you could address this, and I also just want to comment, I mean, you are 93 years old. Your experience through your 92, your experience of the Cuban Missile Crisis, being the ambassador to the Soviet Union under Reagan and George H.W. Bush, we would think you'd be plastering the airwaves and everyone would be inviting you on. But I dare say, I wonder if it's your anti-war point of view that even with this wealth of experience, they are simply not inviting you. But I want to ask that question about the comparison of the weapons that are being poured in right now, encircling Russia, and this point about Poland, with what happened with Cuba and why the U.S. felt it was critical for those missiles of Russia to be removed, even though Cuba was an independent nation, could do what it wanted.
Well, obviously, we saw it as a threat to put nuclear weapons close to the United States. At the time, we didn't admit publicly that we had placed nuclear weapons that could reach the Soviet Union. And that's one of the reasons Kennedy kept it secret that he had agreed to remove the weapons in Turkey. Yes, and at the time, most of us who were involved were not only pleased at the outcome, we Americans felt that, well, it really made no difference how we took them out. It was necessary to remove them. But we learned later, with conferences we had with people involved on their side, that actually if we had bombed the missile sites in Cuba, as the Joint Chiefs had advised Kennedy, but he refused, those officers in charge could have launched the missiles if they were under attack. So we could have lost Miami and maybe other cities right at the start. And if that had happened, how would the U.S. react? How could we politically do anything except strike the Soviet Union in some fashion? And when that sort of thing starts, there was no theoretical way. We ran a number of war games that you could be sure that this process would stop. Now, we also learned later that when a U.S. destroyer was keeping a submarine, a Soviet submarine submerged, that the commander of the submarine actually at one point ordered an attack on the destroyer with a nuclear torpedo. He was overruled by a superior officer. We came very close, though we did not know it at the time, to a nuclear exchange during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's one of the reasons. Now I'm not saying that we have a precisely comparable situation. Moving the 82nd Airborne to Poland is not like moving nuclear weapons. I think it is totally unnecessary, and I don't know how we're going to use them. But what the Russians have objected to was deployment of anti-ballistic missiles sites. And they say that in Eastern Europe, they say that although these are anti-ballistic missiles, the same sites can be used actually for short and intermediate range nuclear missiles just by a change of the software. Now, again, I'm not technically competent, but I think there is an issue here that we have refused to address. And that is obviously, since we pulled out of the ABM treaty and a number of other arms control treaties that had brought the end of the Cold War, I think that it is maybe understandable that the Russians would have fears here. I would also add that it's not just a matter that one side or the other might suddenly launch a nuclear attack. I don't see that happening. But the thing is, as the Cuban Missile Crisis explained to us, accidents can happen when you put yourself in this position. And when they happen, how do you keep it from escalating? A second thing is that maybe the greatest threat that nuclear weapons possess today is that, though it may be irrational for any government actually to use them because it could bring about a suicidal effect, if they get into the hands of terrorists, of non-state actors, they can be used with perhaps impunity. And at the end of the Cold War, we had cooperative agreements and with the Russians to secure their nuclear weapons, and what we call the Sam Nunn and other senators sponsored this. These have all broken down now. And what worries me is there can be a creeping up of another nuclear arms race, because if the Russian government, if President Putin feels he's being pressed and his security threatened, rightly or wrongly, because it's perceptions that count, then what's to keep him, since we have walked out of most of the other agreements, from putting, say, intermediate range missiles in Kaliningrad, or bringing them close to the border, and then what are we going to do? So to get into another insane arms race when we have so many other common problems we need to deal with, I think is extraordinarily unwise.
Jack Matlock, we want to thank you so much for being with us. Served as U.S. Ambassador to the Soviet Union from 1987 to 1991.